My name is Glenn Diesen, and I'm joined today by Colonel Douglas McGregor, former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense under President Trump, who's a combat veteran, PhD, author of many books on military strategy. He's also the CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, trying to present another alternative, and also an extremely popular commentator. So it's great to see you again, Colonel.
Well, it's great to see you, Glenn.
So, just when you think there can't be any more reckless escalation or risk taking in this Ukrainian proxy war, we now see that the Ukrainian invasion of Russian territory, seemingly enthusiastically supported by Nato, uh, yeah, things get more crazy by the day. So, I wanted to ask you, as we now see the Ukrainians having captured huge swaths of Russian territory, and well, Russia's seemingly struggling a bit to bring the borders under control, the front line at least. And on the other hand, we see Ukraine losing a huge amount of troops and military equipment as all of these troops are taken out of their defensive lines and put out in the open. How can we measure this, the territory versus the loss of troops? Is this success or failure? How are you reading the situation?
I think when the history is written, people will point out that this was a tragic waste of quality manpower and equipment on an operation that had no chance of success. There are several levels of importance, though. One of them is that from the vantage point of Moscow and the Russians, this is a NATO invasion. I think it's important to make that distinction. These are not all Ukrainians. And the equipment they are using in many cases is very Western. Western tanks, British tanks, Bradley armored fighting vehicles from the United States. I don't know how much they had in the way of rocket artillery from HIMARS or something else. I know that there's some air defense weapons involved, but all of it smacks of, NATO, not necessarily Ukraine. But they never got very far. They got perhaps 25, 30 miles, and they have now lost all of their major equipment, all of the major platforms, tanks, artillery, electronic warfare equipment, everything you can think of that's rolling stock has been destroyed. The Russians have targeted everything that they could with, of all things, Iskander missiles. That carries a very, very powerful warhead, whether it's a fuel-air explosive or high explosive. The missile normally goes at a range of 250 to 310 miles. So they've been able to do this damage without exposing very many of their soldiers to the fight. The commander in NATO, the supreme allied commander in Europe, made a statement that he was very, very optimistic because the Ukrainians had a great plan to win the war. This was on the 20th of July, which leads me to think that he was probably talking about what was coming with this penetration into Russian territory. I think it's been a terrible mistake. And I think a lot of people will lose their lives as a result of this. So I think the Russians will press forward. And I'd be very surprised if they don't press right into Kiev. I mean, if I were sitting there, I would look at this and I would be disappointed, as President Putin is, and sort of shake my head regarding the stupidity of this action. But I would say it cannot go unanswered. And I think there will be drastic action.
Glenn Diesen is a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway, USN, and an associate editor at the Russia in Global Affairs journal. Diesen's research focus is Russia's transition from the Greater European Initiative to the Greater Eurasian Partnership. Diesen has previously published 10 books, a multitude of journal articles, and is a frequent contributor to international media. The war in Ukraine is a symptom of the collapsing world order, revealing the dysfunction and illegitimacy of the West's liberal hegemony. A Westphalian world order is reasserting itself, although with Eurasian characteristics. The negative aspect of think tanks is the power they wield, from controlling information to functioning as a waiting room for politicians out of office. Information is power, and a think tank's business model has been established that sells political influence in Washington and manufactures consent among the public. The military-industrial complex is the dominant donor to think tanks, which results in a bias toward military solutions and perpetuating conflict.